American, I like how you can't see what Chamoru Sitanamu senza amore, sinanamu tumanu, opana para Americano, go somehow, love. Ipalabra and Olucha, Ibarida, necesita un para Chamoru, Hatun Keke, Baba, but now, get to nothing English, say, in a
Half a day, Hamzu Todos Gwena Hudzung. Stigun, Nuevo na episode Fanatsu. This is another episode of Fanatsu. Gwawe host Midzutalo, si Michael Luhan Bavakwa. And it is no longer Chamorro month. It is no longer Mes Chamorro, but actually that's a great reason to keep talking about Chamorro things. We don't have the pressure of Mes Chamorro. As my guest today, I love his joke about Mes Chamorro, using the English word mess, a pun. I love that. So now that we are past the mess that is Mes Chamorro, we can go back to focusing on the issues that impact the Chamorro people. And so April is always an important month because now that we've recovered from sort of the spectacle that is Mes Chamorro, where everyone kind of puts a little bit more Chamorro out there, now we kind of return to normal and sort of we get down to Gifino Ingles, the nitty gritty, right? Which is that it's one thing to kind of take 1 month out of your life to celebrate your culture, where you come from, but it's another to maintain your identity regularly through practices, through language, through support for different groups, causes, movements, all sorts of stuff like that, right? And so that's why I'm very happy to have with me as a guest, as we sort of recover from Mes Chamorro. We're bouncing back, attorney, veteran, and also a strong promoter of the Chamorro language and the humor, especially the humoristic aspects of Chamorro culture as well. Sidus Masi Pete Santos for joining.
Sidus Masi Lokwi na una faktuju gini masya estati Mes Chamorro lo distikia na mafanyagujo durante dumangkulokku dan pagugwa dan muna sempre Chamorro ajo. Pues thank you again for hosting or having me on the show. And you and I go way back and we have ideas and we pitch it to each other. And so I was recently watching a lot of the Fanatsu podcasts and about the different experiences, especially from the diaspora. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly because I only learned that term recently as an adult. Some say diaspora, some say diaspora, but tomato. It's the I guess the migration of native peoples into other areas of the world. I guess that's probably in a nutshell, right? And so I just wanted to talk about some of what I observed leaving Guam in 1985 and meeting Chamorros that lived in the States for the first time, and the culture shock that I had over there, and the time I've had to reflect as a child growing up, seeing what I saw, seeing how things were different out there, seeing, some people hold very strongly to their Chamorro identity and Chamorro practices while others shed them, and juxtapose that with our history about the Navy and the buy-in of some of the people, the Chamorro people, that say in order to be successful in life, you have to embrace English, and some even go as far as not just only embrace English, but to shed any native identity or your native language. And I will note that the first person that challenged that notion to me was Angel Santos. And he asked me, he goes, and when I spoke with Angel, the few times I was fortunate to speak with him, we always spoke in Chamorro. And he said, Anginon hasudzo, mampus at libis edzo na hinasu. He said, if you think about it, it's a very backwards way to think that someone who is monolingual, right, who speaks only English would be better than someone who's bilingual or trilingual or multilingual for that matter. Because the person that has command of multiple languages, you know, is gonna know about multiple cultures, and that just gives you a broader perspective and a deeper, wiser sense of life. And so, you know, that challenge, that notion, that belief that, you know, in order to get ahead in life, you have to go English and be English all the way, you know.
Yeah.
And
Let me just because one of the things that I've always your experience growing up, of course, fuminut sa Momoru hao, mafanagwi hao nai, give holami familia. But as you know, for many in our generation, the language wasn't actively used in the home, or it wasn't actively used with children. Even if it was heard, it wasn't actively passed down. And so can you just talk a little bit, because you mentioned the Fanatsu episode when there was a lot of, it was all, people who were talking about how Chamorro is completely disconnected from them. Can you talk about sort of what it was in your family that Chamorro was passed down, or that sort of that they felt it was important to use the language?
Sure. So I was raised by my grandparents, and Chamorro was the only language used in the home because we had our great grandparents also, and they barely spoke English. And we actually got in trouble when we spoke English because they thought that we were conspiring or conniving or, hiding things from them when we speak in English. When my grandmother would get home from work, because she used to go to the officers' houses on base and do housework for them. My great grandmother would sort of rat me out that I was speaking English. I had friends over and I was speaking English, and that we were talking about her, joking about her, laughing about her, and she just accused me without any basis, that I was talking bad about usangan, then so anyways, I would get in trouble that how come you're disrespecting si Nana because you're talking about her, joking about her, so on and so forth. And so that was just the context or the history of my household growing up. It's because we had the elders, the great grandparents there, that we had to speak the language, and that was the language of life that we spoke. And all my mom's siblings, they were spoken to in Chamorro. Majority of them spoke in Chamorro. A couple of them didn't. I don't know whether that was their personal choice or, but the vast majority, at least from my grandparents and my great grandparents, they would always speak Chamorro to us.
No, Sidzus Mase, thank you for that, because I want to normalize the learning of Chamorro so that those who are trying to learn realize, the only thing that can stop you is if you stop. So, that
Right.
You just got to keep going and find those who can help, but just keep learning. But I also want to highlight examples like yours so people understand learning a language means surrounding children with the language, right? If you want to pass it to the kids, you have to use it.
It wasn't a conscious thing for us.
Mm.
It was just normal part of life, right? That's what we spoke at the house. And there were a lot of things that I remember with our chores around the house, or with our preparation of food and all that. We could communicate what to do in Chamorro, but when it came to English, it's kind of like, go out there and guani the taki. We default to Chamorro, right? Because that's the way our elders spoke to us, and that's just growing up. That's how it was. But
but go ahead, continue, Dispensa.
Yeah, so in 1985, our family uprooted and went to the States. And like I said, that's the first time I had experience dealing with stateside Chamoros. A couple of family members back then had come back to Guam after living off island, and we got limited exposure to them, and we hear their stories, so on and so forth. And but there wasn't that many people that left at that time that I could remember, because I remember when we went to in 1985, it was so different from today, where in places like Fort Lewis, Washington, or San Diego, California, every third car you see on the road has a Chamorro sticker, right? Back then, it was far and few in between to find Chamorro people, right? And especially back then, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have Facebook. So it was really just by word of mouth that, hey, you're going to Long Beach, so check this person out. Here's their number, here's their address. And they gave you turn by turn, directions to get there. And you could show up and they wouldn't know you were coming, but because there was no way to tell them in advance. But anyways, so what I experienced when I got out there, there were Chamorros who had assimilated, I would say, with other ethnic groups. So it just so happened that the block that we lived on one half of the block was all the Black residents, and on the other half of the block was all the Mexican residents, right? And so there were a group of Chamorros that had assimilated with the Mexicans. They acted Chicano or Cholo or whatever you want to call them, right? And then there was another group that assimilated with the Blacks. And so when I came along, and we would gather at family gatherings and whatnot, I was sort of like an oddity to them, right? Because I had just come from the island. And so they asked me, how do you say this? Or what does Doggin mean? All these funny things, right? But to me, it was just like I felt like a fish out of water, because I felt like I needed to assimilate into something else over there, because there wasn't really, I was like I said, the oddball, the only one, that had any idea of what it was like to grow up back home, what it was like. And then the older Chamorros, they would say, hey, come here. And they'll speak to me in Chamorro, and then I'd speak to them in Chamorro, and they'd get a kick out of it, right? Because at the time, the younger generation over there had not already, they're not speaking Chamorro, right? So that was my first experience. And then, after I graduate high school, I come back to Guam, get reassimilated back to the island, right? Even though I had picked up some culture, habits, and stuff like that from living on the mainland in California and both in Washington, right? I get back, and I've never, ever, wherever I've lived, I've never felt like I belonged. And so I come back home to Guam, and, I reassimilate back into our community. And then, I had a lot of time to reflect on some of the people I met and experienced. And I saw a lot of successful people out there, people that were business owners, people that were successful in the military, people that were, just out there doing great things, Chamorro people. And some of them held very near, tight to their Chamorro identity and language. And some of them didn't. Some of them completely shed it, right? And so I'm thinking now, okay, that's proof positive that you don't have to shed your Chamorro identity and language to be successful. So whatever brainwashing or notion that we were told, decades ago, that in order to get ahead, you have to shed who you are and your identity. That is absolutely not true. And the biggest thing, that I take away from that is that although there are challenges, right, and there are advantages to shedding your Chamorro culture, because I do remember being in the military, the ones that were more favored and the ones that were more that got ahead quicker, right, rose through the ranks quicker, were the ones who rubbed elbows and sort of assimilated into the culture, the American culture, right? And I noticed that, and it's not just the party system doesn't just exist on Guam. It's not exclusive to Guam, right? It exists everywhere and in all aspects, whether it's military, private business, government. There's always going to be a dominant group, and if you speak their language and watch their sports and do the same things they do, then you're going to get ahead quicker. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to get ahead if you don't do those things. That's the biggest takeaway I got, is that as long as your work and you merit, right, promotion, or you work hard, and if you're an entrepreneur and build your business, there's nothing. There are challenges. They exist, but it's not all doom and gloom like we were led to believe, that you shut the door completely if you hold on to your Chamorro culture and language. That is absolutely not the case. And so I've seen people that rose through the ranks. I've seen people who are business owners. I've seen people who are professionals, in their fields, and both types, both the ones that have held on to their culture and language and the ones who have shed it. And did it make a difference? Sure. But did it make all the difference? No. Right? Yeah, it might have been a little bit easier for you. It might have been a little bit more easier going for you if you assimilated more into the dominant culture. But it doesn't mean that if you don't assimilate into the dominant culture, then you're not going to get ahead. But also, you can assimilate, but also at the same time, still maintain your own identity and language, right? It's a false dichotomy. It's not one or the other. You could do one or the other, or you could do both. And I think I'm an example of someone that has done both, right? Maintain my culture, my my beliefs and my language, and I've gone places and done things, and on my own merit, I was able to excel. So the fact that you're not proficient in English, or you don't assimilate into the dominant culture, that's not a complete barrier.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience, because I've seen even in the experiences of Chamorros who have joined in recent generations the military, you find that, as you were saying, those who joined, of course, in the 30s experienced direct sort of formalized racism, especially in the U.S. Navy. But those who joined even in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was a lot of racism, even if it wasn't in the rules anymore, like it had been in the past, where Chamorros were forced to be mess attendants. It was definitely there. And like you said, that's why, the songwriter, I remember reading his story about Rocky Mantonotnia, who changed his name to Rocky and boxed like other Chamorros to kind of try to prove that they were just as good, because they couldn't get accepted or promoted or supported in a lot of ways. So they would try to find what a lot of African Americans had done but previously as well. If they let you box, maybe you can box and show how strong you are, get some respect, because all the doors, because of who you are, the color of your skin, they seem to be mainly closed to you. So you got to find some way to get past that. But one thing that's interesting, though, is that more recently now, you get, articles from Department of Defense itself talking about Chamorro culture in Afghanistan amongst the troops, talking about how service is part of Chamorro culture. And I've collected a bunch of stories of parents and children who go into the military talking about their cousins who are also in the Middle East, and how their culture actually makes them stronger and better soldiers. So it's interesting to think about that along with what you're sharing. And so I wanted to hear more specifically about your experience in the military, but also the experiences of others sort of that you worked with.
Yeah. So by the time I got in, I joined in 1997 for the first time, right? And that was here with the Guam National Guard, and it was majority Chamorro back then, of course, but there was always a culture of excellence, right? And the Guam National Guard, and to this day, there's still a culture of excellence, right? We go out and we have a big chip on our shoulder, and we have something to prove. And so that's why everyone knows that when the Guam Guard comes around, they know to expect excellence. They know to expect, professionalism, right? So by the time I went active duty in 2001, one of the first persons I met was a command sergeant major from Saipan. And we're out in formation, and he calls me over to the side and he says, Santos, are you Chamorro? I said, yes, I am. Sergeant Major Tudela, right? Because Tudela is obviously a Chamorro name, especially a name from the CDMI, and one of my great grandparents is a Tudela. So he asked me, Kosinya Fumino Chamorro, Ungan. So we start talking, and then he says, look, here's the deal. You're Chamorro. You have to, put forth your best effort. You have to be the example. We have a reputation as Chamorros to keep, right? We are known as being tough. We are known as being smart, and we are known as being, high speed, as they call it, right? And it's true. There's a lot of Chamorros in the military that excel to the highest ranks, right? Your first cousin was one of the ones I got the pleasure to work with, right? General Smith, right? Tracy Artero Lujan Smith, right? Or is it Lujan Artero? It's Artero Lujan.
Lujan Artero.
Okay, right. So, anyways, she's your first cousin, and she's an excellent example. She's the first official female general officer in the military that's Chamorro, right? Of Chamorro descent. So anyways, and she still is serving. I think she's a 2-star now, but I met her when she was a 1-star. But anyways, getting back to Sergeant Major Tudela, right? He pulled me to the side and he says, look, you really, really have to put forth the best look, right? Your best foot forward. And that stuck with me. And so when I reported to my first duty station in Germany, and the people there said, oh, you're coming from Guam. We expect great things from you. And by the way, we're gonna have a barbecue, and there better be Keliguin, right? So our reputation, by the time I joined in the late 90s, early 2000s, our reputation was already that of excellence, right? The Chamorro people. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever came across a Chamorro that got in trouble, or that was known for, because I hardly ever encountered any Chamorros that were troublemakers. But I went to Fort Hood in 2009, right? So that's already several years later. And one of my first cases as a JAG was to prosecute a AWOL soldier, and the soldier was a Maritita, a Chamorro. So they picked him up. He had been AWOL for several years, but that's my first time encountering a Chamorro with bad conduct, and it kind of like, it struck me. It hurt, right? Because we have a reputation, of excellence in the service, and that was the first time I felt ashamed, right? Because here we have someone who has brought shame, just like the family, right? The Chamorro family. When one of your relatives, is the one that robbed the corner store, right? You probably don't want to show your face in public for a while, because that's the shame that everyone in the family gets ashamed. And so as a culture, as a people, right, I was ashamed that one of our own had done something wrong.
No, it's interesting to think about this, because that idea of excellence, I really think it comes, through those Chamorros who served in Vietnam and had to deal with a lot of, messed up crap, a
Right.
lot of sort of, and I've Robert Underwood with Humanities Guahan had a great series interviewing Chamorros, speaking Vietnam vets, sort of sharing their stories, talking about, and some of them clearly deserved higher honors. I remember I
Yes.
interviewed C. Martin Manglotnya, who probably should have gotten sort of the highest medals possible, but the racism at the time kind of, interfered with that. And so, but I think that then from those who really served well, and then kind of, what you were talking about there, I don't think that people, I don't think that a lot of people kind of understand the subtle sort of values of family and community, and how that can sort of help somebody advance, or help somebody be part of, whether it's a corporation, a company, a military unit, because I know somebody who just relocated to the States last year, and he said that even something as simple as he works at a restaurant, and he said even he misses how on Guam there was this feeling like if somebody was sick, the other employees would say, "Oh, I'll cover you, or I'll help you out." But then he says that where he's at now, no one ever wants to cover anybody or help anybody, and it's not even about helping the restaurant itself, but it's just that they don't feel they're obligated to each other either. Whereas on Guam, whether you work at a coffee shop, whether you work in the military, whether you work in an office, there's still that feeling like I'm tied to something bigger. I owe something a little bit more to this than sort of, as an individual part of something larger. And so I liked what you were saying there, because I
Right.
think that
And I
might be
would
part of it.
be I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that, I growing up in government of Guam too, at one point in time I worked uh at the Guam Police Department. And if there I wouldn't be honest if I didn't, say that there wasn't what I observed as a little bit of reverse racism, or racism actually, you know, because of course the Guam Police Department was dominated by Chamorros, and probably still is. But I do remember um, a couple of colleagues of mine who were Caucasian, right? Um, who, for one reason or another, and I'll discuss those reasons, were kind of ostracized. Well, one was because one guy thought he knew better than everybody, right? That he knew all the answers, and he was better. He was more smarter than everyone. So we all tolerated him, and but at the same time he was sort of a little bit like persona non grata, right? And then others who weren't like that, but still kept that uh, that costumbre americano, right? It didn't sit well with the others. So, for example, we did an operation one night, and it went a little long. And normally, if the operation had ended early or on time, we would all go meet up at King's or something and eat breakfast. But because the operation went long, we didn't get that opportunity. So we had to wrap up all our equipment and bring it back and secure it, and then just go back to the office and secure the office and call it a day. So, anyways, that we had a long operation one night. We go back to the office, and there's one of the officers, one of the Caucasian officers I was talking about, sitting down at his desk, and he's eating his McDonald's. And so our boss walks in, and he goes, "Where'd you get that?" And he says, "Well, I picked it up on the way in." And my boss says, "Where's everybody else's? You didn't bother to call and ask who, you know?" So he hadn't even bitten his burger yet. He had just started eating his fries. My boss picked everything up and threw it in the garbage can and said, "Look, we're a team, we're a family. And this is Guam. You got to learn how we do things here. You don't go get your own food and come back and eat in front of everybody else. That's so tayo mamalang, right? So I'd be dishonest to say, you know, if I there wasn't sort of a reverse racism or racism, whatever you want to call it, that exists here, and it still does today, right? But that's just the dominant culture, right? It's part of the dominant culture. Whatever the dominant culture is, we have our practices and our beliefs and our ways. And if you're an outsider and you come in, you gotta assimilate, right? But that didn't stop this guy from getting ahead, from getting promoted, but it did, you know, sort of put him, you know, sort of in a different light as compared to everyone else, right? If I could say that, you know, you just gotta, you know, that's just the way, that's just human nature, and no matter where you go, right?
No, again,
You
no.
gotta, we're a team, we're a family. You gotta be like everybody else, and if you try to be different, then that's not going to be well received.
No, thank you for sharing that story, because I think it shows, you know, that sometimes people say, oh, you know, the culture here is just like the States, just like anywhere, but there's always subtle differences. And the story that you kind of described there shows that your cultural values of your upbringing, right, your expectation around others in a community, it changes, and it can be kind of small, simple choices like that, right? Like, do you feel like, you know what, I'm going to get something for myself, should I ask if others want something too? And
Right.
if you
That's
grow up in
already
a
a
certain
given. That's,
background,
you're supposed to know that, right?
yeah,
For
and
us
if
at
you grew up in
least.
a certain culture, you think about that, because you don't want the shame of eating in front of everybody else and being tayo mamala, right? And then you don't want that. So, but for others, it's just like you're raised to think about yourself and not others, so it doesn't occur to you, right? And so, but I think that's, I think from the stories that you've shared, that's actually one of the strengths in terms of people who come up with that, with a culturally sort of collective based upbringing, is that sort of you function pretty well in a unit because you're used to not just thinking about yourself, you're used to considering what others need too.
Right. And part of the culture shock too, going back to, you know, when I lived in the States, that's the first time I went to a party and they charged a cover charge. And then I saw people, you know, bringing in their 6-pack of beer and they're holding on to their beer. And they would sell you a beer, but they wouldn't give you a beer. Right. So those were all foreign concepts to me. But, you know, that's just the way things are over there. And that's the dominant culture. That's the way they are. And not to say they're all like that, because I've been to, you know, other parties where, you know, they provide everything and, you know, you're not expected to bring anything, you know, and they don't charge a cover charge. But there are some subcultures like that, some areas that are like that.
No, thank you. We're getting some comments, and so let me just share one real fast. CJ Baza Pasqua, Hafade J, he has a few stories to share. He says, I had a friend who was given a hard time by his sergeant during his entire time in boot camp. At the end of this time, he was given the opportunity to ask him why. At the time, the sergeant said he always gives Chamoru's a hard time because he wasn't ever able to break one of them.
Yeah. And, you know, thinking back to, I had a couple of Carolinian or Chamalinian classmates out in Washington. And they completely, you know, did not want anything to do with any of the culture over there. Of the school that we went to was like 97% white, right? And they just they didn't participate in anything. They, you know, they went there, they were sat in the back of the room, they didn't talk, you know, this and that. And but they did what they needed to do. They were intelligent, they passed all their classes, they graduated just like everybody else, but they didn't participate. They didn't participate in their high school experience. They never went to games. They never went to pep rallies. They never went to anything, right? And they were the last ones to come to school, the first ones to leave, right? School was just something that they needed to do and get it over with. But other than that, I hung out with them a few times. We go to their house, they're playing ukulele, we're eating kelaguin, barbecuing and stuff like that. And so they just didn't want, they intentionally did not want to assimilate or even get involved with any of the non-Chamorro, non-Chamalinian people. So anyone that ever went over to their place was always either Chamorro or Chamalinian.
That brings up an interesting sort of historical point, because, if you look at the CNMI, when there was the issue of voting for Commonwealth or not, the Carolinians and the Chamalinians were more likely to be resistant, not wanting to lose things like culture, not wanting to lose identity, not wanting to end up like Chamorros in Guam or Native Hawaiians.
There's a lot of resistance songs from that era.
Exactly.
Anti-American culture, not anti-American, but anti-American culture, right? About, ditching their ways of livelihood of the lansu and the pesca for the 9-to-5 job, right? So there's a lot of songs from that era that lament about the changes that the American flag brought to the culture. Not necessarily anti-American, but pro-local and lamenting the impact, if you will, that the change in government had on the local culture and local way of life.
No, very true. I wanted to, when you were sharing your experiences sort of in the States, it reminds me of, it was interesting because I remember when I first went out to the States for grad school, and I remember going to Long Beach because I worked for one of the nonprofits there, the Guam Communications Network. And a common thing that I would hear, which always made me feel a little bit weird, was when I would meet a diasporic Chamorro, and then I would say, "Oh, are you Chamorro?" And then they would say, "Oh, no, I'm not Chamorro, but my parents are." Or they would say, "I'm not Chamorro, but my grandparents are." And that was, for me, that was strange because I had not grown up feeling particularly Chamorro. And, this was a time when people were still sometimes using Guamanian, still sometimes using Chamorro. So I wasn't exactly sure what we were supposed to call ourselves because different people said different things. But I never felt like I was something different than my grandparents, even if we lived very different lives. I still understood that we were part of the same thing. So it was very jarring to me then when I would find these Chamorros who, your parents are Chamorro. Why do you call yourself something different? It was very fascinating and a little bit frightening for me to kind of encounter that.
I have a funny story of when I was growing up. My older relatives would ask me, a whole bunch of questions. What do I want to be when I grow up? Da 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 da. Then they asked me, what are you? I would say I'm half Chamorro, half Guamanian. And, I because I didn't know, I was probably 5 or 6 years old, but I would tell them, yeah, I'm half Chamorro, half Guamanian. And they would just chuckle about that. Me not knowing what the difference was, right? But I just know that both were from Guam. So I'm like, well, I've got to be half Guamanian, half Chamorro. There was no basis for me to say that. I'm just like, well, I'm from Guam and I'm Chamorro, so I'm half Guamanian, half Chamorro, right? So, anyways, a couple of other stories of people I've met in the military, and I'll give you two extremes. So, one guy was a Kittagua, and he was a sergeant major. So me and another service member who was also Chamorro went over to him because we saw him at a meeting at the headquarters. And we said, "Hey, Sergeant Major, Afaday." And he goes, "Excuse me, I don't speak Chamorro. You're going to have to speak to my wife." Right. And so we're like, whoa, okay, Mr. Agudzosu, right? So we just left it at that. And then the other one was a colonel. We met up at a meeting. I never met him before. His name was Colonel Camacho at the time. I don't think he went on to be a general, but he was a colonel, and he pulled me over to the side while we're waiting for a staff meeting to start, and we're talking in Chamorro. And so this captain, I was a captain at the time. This captain comes over, Captain Smith, and she's waiting off to the side. And so he notices out of the corner of his eye, he turns around and says, "Excuse me, Captain, are you waiting to speak to me?" And she says, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Well, let me just finish talking with my friend over here, and I'll speak to you in a minute." So we start talking in Chamorro again a little bit. And then he goes, "Hold on." And he turns to the side and he says, "Oh, Captain Smith, you don't mind if we talk in our language, do you?" And she said, "No, sir." He goes, "Oh, good, because I don't mind when you talk in yours," right? Which is English. And he did that because, he's a colonel. He can, right? He was just messing with her, right? And he's got that Chamorro humor. But when he's a colonel, now he's got the rank to, sort of pick at people, right? And so he never hid his Chamorro-ness. He never, shied away from it. But he wasn't like wearing it out on his sleeve. It was just a fact of his life, a part of his being, a part of his identity, right? And so that's those we come across those kinds of stories or encounters, and it's just amazing to see the vast difference from the spectrum, right? You got some who just like totally disavow their culture and their language and their identity, and others who embrace it and live it. And it didn't stop them. It didn't stop them at all. And that's the point of why I asked to, have this discussion today, because we've been discussing, or I've been hearing a lot of discussion about, our history and the suppression of our culture and our language and our identity. But, it doesn't have to, we don't have to look at it from a victim mentality, and we can live it, we can embrace it, and we can practice it. And it's not going to stop us from getting ahead in life. It's not going to stop us from advancement. It's not going to stop us from success.
Yeah, Hungan, thank you.
And I think too, it actually, like Angel Santos said, it's actually better. It helps us. We're better served. We're better suited. We're better able to deal with things, when we have multiple perspectives, not just one singular perspective.
Okay. Okay, I want to bring in some more comments that we're getting in. So Hafade Martha Dueñas, supporter of Fanatsu, Hafade, and she's mentioning that she grew up sort of in the time frame that we're talking about. Her family moved to the States after the war. And she says that many of us didn't feel that we had the permission to call ourselves Chamorro, to claim our identity. And Hungan, this is something that I've encountered with many Chamorros. Like I've found some Chamorros who were never even told the word Chamorro, or even really sort of Guamanian, just never connected in any way to it. And so I definitely understand that perspective too, in terms of feeling like you can't claim an identity because no one has given it to you. That there's maybe just a Guam flag in the house, or maybe just a novena that's said every year, and sort of that's the only thing that you can connect to it. And so I definitely,
I think, Doc, I've mentioned this before. We're seeing the Chamorro diaspora in the States go the way, and there's nothing wrong with it, go the way of previous migrations, go the way of the Irish, go the way of the Italians. They claim their Italian flag, right? They cook Italian food, but do they speak Italian? No. Do they go out and try to, make everything Italian? No. They identify as Italian. They have the Italian flag. They have the Italian food. But other than that, that's just the extent. And so we're seeing a lot of Chamorros go that way too. And that's just the natural progression. We're now into the second, third, fourth generations of Chamorros that are living out in the States. And it's not a surprise that the way the Irish went, the way the Italians went, the way you name it went, right? That's what's going to result, especially when there is a dominant culture out there and it's an English-based culture, right? And so that's naturally going to happen. But there are, those of us who will continue to hold on, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the whole point of this talk is that it didn't impede us from achieving success.
Again, and we've been talking a lot about veterans, and so I do want to hear your thoughts on sort of one of the most prominent Chamorro veterans, sort of the late Congressman and Brigadier General in the U.S. Marines, Ben Blas. And so he is somebody who, in a way, exemplifies sort of what we've been talking about, because, he was somebody who grew up with the strong pressures to give up your language and culture.
Right.
He somebody who joined the Marines at a time when facing a lot of discrimination, right? But he's somebody who achieved, advanced a great deal. And so that's why some people say, oh, he would be so proud to have a base named for him. And I always tell people that I think that Ben Blas, for much of his life, it would have been his dream come true to have a Marine Corps base for him. But in the last few decades of his life, when he experienced sort of a desire to return to his roots, when he wrote his history books, when he made his documentary video series, that was the time when he was really feeling the call that he wanted to kind of reconnect. And so I think that's an important thing to bring in for this too, is that even if there has been sort of disconnections in people, but there's always a chance to try to reconnect. There's always a chance to try to revive.
Look at Angel Santos, right? He was active duty Air Force, and it was his experience in his Air Force career really that opened his eyes, so to speak, to see what was happening beyond our shores, and look at what's going on and what happened to us, and reflect on that. And then he came back and he became an activist and then a local senator. Very, I don't want to say a similar situation with General Blas. Remember, when people go into the military, they're young, they're impressionable, they're learning, right? They don't have that body of knowledge yet, right? They're still young and they're fresh and they're green and they're learning things. What I know about General Blas is that he was obviously came up in a different time, grew up in a different time when Guam was a different place. He was a conservative as far as his values are concerned, right? And after his service, like you said, he came back and served our people in a different way as a congressperson and then also as a historian. And I admired him very much for his, I admire him for his military service. I admire him for his service in Congress, but I think what I most admire him is his contributions to our history, capturing our history, telling our history, and telling it in a way that was relatable, right? Because we can always have experts or professors from different countries and from the United States that study anthropology and culture and all that. We can always have them come and talk about and write books about the Chamorro history and culture. But when we hear it from the authors that are Chamorro that lived in Guam, right? You get it from a different perspective. Also I highly respect and admire, all the contributions and work of Carlos Taitano, right? So it's these guys, these trailblazers, right, who were not only who not only served our island and our country, but they also contributed to our body of knowledge and our history and gave it a local perspective, right? And so that's why I felt it was kind of refreshing, because a lot of times we read history books and we hear of things way back in history from the 1600s, 1700s, but we got to reverse engineer it, right? We got to look at it and say, well, is that really what happened? Because he's looking at it from a different lens, right? He was a French explorer. So what was in the French mindset at that time, right? So he's telling it from the French perspective, or he's telling it from a Spanish perspective, right? So when we get these Chamorro academics who have lived and served and tell the story of the Chamorro people, that to me is much more relatable and more valuable and more accurate.
Hungen. No, Sidus Masin. We're coming up towards the end of the hour, and so I wanted to kind of move us into, because in terms of in the diaspora, one thing that we're seeing now is that because this is one thing that happens, is that if you come from this place and your parents give you very little to nothing, or as one of the commenters said, they give you very mixed messages on sort of who you are and where you come from. Some people will move in the direction of thinking, well, therefore, whatever I've been taught must not be important, and so I'm just going to kind of move in the direction of assimilation. But others sort of feel the loss. They say, what is this thing that I'm supposed to be a part of, but no one has taught me about it? Like, why is it, right? And so and this is one thing that I've really seen, is that for so many Chamorros in the diaspora now, there is a desire to connect, a desire to learn more, a desire to kind of go beyond just the Guam flag in their house, or the big wooden spoon and the big wooden fork that was on their wall.
If I could, I had a Filipino friend in Washington in high school, and we became very good friends. And so one day I go to his house and we eat dinner, and his dad, very Filipino guy, right? He goes, "You're Chamorro?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Chamorros are just bastard Filipinos." And that was the first time I heard that, right? And he says, the Spanish killed all the Chamorros, and then the only ones that went to the people that populated Guam are all the Filipino prisoners. So you guys are all just you were a penal colony of the Philippines and Mexico and Spain, right? That's what he said. He said, there is no Chamorro anymore. You guys are all just descendants of Filipino prisoners. And he said that to me, right? And that just like sent me in like total self-doubt, all these things, right? Because I'm 13, 14 years old at the time, and this is an older Filipino guy, and and he says it with such authority, right? And I'm questioning myself now. What? So that sort of pushed me to go and do my own personal research on is the Chamorro identity, who are the Chamorro people, what is our Chamorro history, what happened during Spanish times. And I was able to ultimately, come to the conclusion that guy's full of crap. That's just something that someone says at a dinner cocktail party, right? A trivial fact that is made up. It's fake news. But that being told to me at that certain time and point in my life, not having done any research before that, and only knowing what I know just from living in Guam and growing up with my family, no formal education or no research into what happened here on this island during Spanish times and how the culture progressed, that really sent me, took me aback. It sent me for a tailspin. And I took this personal endeavor to learn as much as I could about the Chamorro people and about the Chamorro culture, to prove that no, what this guy said was all just BS. And that's my conclusion, right? Yes, there were some soldiers and some prisoners that came to the Philippines at one point in time, but they did not replace the population of Guam. So that's just bunk.
Good. No, again, anything we can do to push back against those ideas of, our non-existence, whether they come from others or whether they come from our own people, because sometimes our own people get invested in those ideas. And so, one of the things that you're very passionate about is the Chamorro language. And so I think that this is one of the ways that for those who, whether they're in the Marianas or in the diaspora, wherever they are, if your sense of identity is greatly enhanced by speaking your native language. I feel that you can, of course, be Chamorro or anything, even if you can't speak that language, but you cannot replace the speaking of your language with any amount of t-shirts, tattoos, or food. No
Right.
matter how
And for
many tattoos
me,
you get, it cannot replace it. So I wanted to
for
hear your
me, the
thoughts on that.
connection is with the elders, right? Because that's how the elders lived, that's how they spoke, that's how they expressed themselves. One of the things that one of my elder aunts, who told me the story about her daughter getting spanked in the hand by a Caucasian teacher in the 50s, and she went up to the school and punched her, right? And told her, "Don't you ever touch my daughter again." And the reason for getting spanked in the hand was, of course, for speaking Chamorro. So, anyways, she said, they cannot do that to us because this is how we express ourselves. This is how we relate to each other. We don't speak English well. We can't convey our thoughts in English. We can only say it the way we want to say it in Chamorro. And so that to me is the ultimate connection that leads me, to the culture and the language. It's that through the language you can more properly and better express, your ideas and your feelings and just in general.
So just we've got more comments that have been coming in, and so let me just share one real fast. This is from Vince Leon Guerrero, who's reflecting on sort of you talking about that experience in GPD, sort of, make sure you have food for everybody. He says, back in the early 60s, their little league coach chastised a teammate who broke out a pack of gum 5 sticks and shared it with only his buddies. He said that before they unwrapped it, the coach collected it all and like Jesus divided each stick into pieces and gave each of them a small piece, saying, if you bring snacks, make sure you bring enough for everyone.
Yeah. And then you don't show up to a Chamorro party empty-handed. You just don't. Yeah. That's not, But nowadays, everybody comes with a 12-pack, and then we have like 3 crates of 12-pack drinks. And
again, I think for a future episode, we'll need to talk about, because this is one thing that I've always noticed is that a lot of people who love Guam sort of, especially, thinking about parties, thinking about your obligations to bring things. There's a lot of people who enjoy that, especially who aren't Chamorro, but then don't necessarily bring anything themselves. Like I have one of my friends, he always complains that he has non-Chamorro neighbors who always come to his family's gatherings, and they've never ever hosted a gathering at their house and invited him to it, or that it's sort of that part of it is
so
what
the reciprocal part is not there, right?
Exactly.
It's missing, right? There's no reciprocation. And we got to understand that in Chamorro culture there's a social contract. I mean, that's the easiest way to explain it. We have a social contract, and there are norms and practices that we do that are within that social contract, and that you just got to understand what those expectations are.
No, Sidus Masi, thank you so much, Pete, for joining once again. And then for this topic, I think it's important, whether you are in the Marianas and sort of you feel strongly connected to your culture, not to feel the need anymore to give up your language and culture in terms of advancement. But then at the same time, for those who already feel disconnected or feel like they have nothing in terms of their language and culture, it's an important reminder that that doesn't have to hold you back either, that you can find ways to reconnect to it.
Can I just recap in a nutshell?
Sure.
So the old idea or notion that you have to embrace English and shed your culture and language in order to be successful has proven through the past, 100 years to be inaccurate. It's false. You can receive some advantages, but they're small advantages, and it is absolutely no bar to success to continue to maintain and hold your identity, your culture, and your language. And as Angel Santos had said, it's actually an advantage for those who are bilingual, multilingual, whatever. But for someone who only speaks one language, whether it's English or any other language, they're at a disadvantage.
Si Zeus Masi. And si Zeus Masi no hamzu todos ni umeiga para ume ekongo que este na episode fanatsu. Este ha para pago a Jos. Este ki